Hey guys, I'm doing my third video for today. It's been kind of a busy day and I'm actually running to Managua this evening, so I've got a lot going on. Like, this is a crazy busy day, but so somehow, this is funny, like, I'm not an economist, but apparently I play one on YouTube. But my background on Wall Street kind of gives me some insight on things, and I've worked in a lot of fields, and sometimes there's just things I've been exposed to. So a lot of people mention gold on the channel, and I'm not here to talk about gold tonight, but I will quadruple down on gold as a backing for currency is just an internet scam. I cannot possibly state this enough. And I have people say things like, be careful before you say you're committing to something, but what do you think about, right? Gold is a scam. Gold backing is extremely well known to be a scam. However, it was mentioned a few times, and it's kind of in passing, and I want to catch this because it shouldn't be in passing. That and this is specifically, it's always the United States, right? Other countries don't worry about gold backing, like the whole gold back scam is just one that it's a long con going on in the U.S. But it said, well, the U.S. is in so much debt. This is because of gold, and what's being skipped here is because it's true, the U.S. is in debt, like that's absolutely true. But it's being implied that the debt is bad, and that we don't want it, and that it is not intentional. That is part of the con. The gold is, in some ways, to some degree, it is people trying to sell gold, right? There is a direct scam of people trying to take advantage of you. However, they are leveraging another bit of misinformation to try to either make the gold. They're trying to explain the gold through another bit of misinformation, 2 bits. Once you start establishing all the information is false, it's easy to get lost in things that don't make sense. But it's also that it's a loaded statement, right? Gold is a solution to a problem we're acting like is assumed. But the problem doesn't exist. Debt is not bad. That's the problem. And debt sounds bad, right? If you're not educated in finance, if you don't have a background in economics, it's easy to feel like debt is a bad thing in and of itself. Of course, bad debt is bad, right? Just like anything, bad is bad. But debt on its own exists because it has good places to exist, and a lot of them. And if you study economics, like one of the things you find all the time is what makes the rich so rich. One of the answers, there's many, but one of them, the obvious one is they're born rich, right? And they just don't lose it over time. But how do they get so rich? And one of the most powerful answers is debt. They understand how to use debt. And the poor generally don't understand how to use debt. And you can tell who's been brought up in those worlds, because when people say debt, people who understand economics and finance and generally the educated rich, right? The rich dad, poor dad, the rich dad people, the children of the rich dad, they hear a tool to make myself richer. And when people who are poor dad educated or don't have those backgrounds in economics, they hear bad, right? So completely different things. So let me give you a very personal example of how debt can make you richer. And someone's going to argue with this. And if someone comes back and says, but it means they don't understand debt, because there's no but here, right? So you get a credit card. You go out and get a credit card. You've never had credit. You just have straightforward life. You make $1,000 a month. You're not doing very well. You make $1,000 a month, and that's what you live on. You then get an opportunity to get a credit card. No fees, purely free. This credit card gives you 30 days, no interest, but you have to pay by the end of the 30 days, or there's interest. Who cares what the interest is? Okay. If you are living well, meaning with enough resources to protect yourself against momentary financial problems, such as under normal circumstances, right? You would hope you're not living paycheck to paycheck. Of course, people who are actually making $1,000 a month would be, but just numbers here, right? Assuming you're able to have enough holdings to protect you against emergencies, right? So basically 1 month's additional salary under normal circumstances. Adjust for your situation, whatever. That's not what we're trying to argue. But let's say you have $1,000 in the bank and you can't use it because it's your safety cushion. Okay, great. That's a good thing. So you're making $1,000 a month. You're living on $1,000 a month. You're not overspending. No one's talking about overspending. That is an unrelated discussion. Debt may make it easier to overspend, for sure. But don't conflate debt with overspending, which is what the poor dads do. Don't let that happen. That's when you get confused. Underspending or proper spending with debt is the most powerful. Overspending is just always foolish. Using terms like overspending with the US government is also foolish. They're not overspending. And I can show you why, and we're going to. Okay, so if you're spending correctly, you have all this stuff, and you get the option to have credit, which puts you into debt, right? So having credit gives you the option of having debit. Anyway, so you get credit with your credit card, and in a very personal situation, you decide to use that $1,000 to go out and buy a new stereo, television, PlayStation, you name it. And then at the end of that month, you start paying off that credit card immediately, and then you simply live off of the credit card every month, and you don't change your spending except for that one-time advance, and you just use your credit card. Have you gone into debt? Technically, yes. Have you overspent? Absolutely not. You have kept your spending rate the same, but what the credit card has done is allow you to get a one-time advance on your life by 30 days. Now, you don't get to do it again, but you do have the option of making more money and paying it off and using it again, or having the amount increase, but you'd have to earn more money for that to be useful, or whatever, right? It's a flexible tool that you could choose to use in different ways in the future. But for now, assuming this example, all you've done is switch to using that card. Now, of course, in the real world, a lot of times those cards also come with cash back, and so you definitely want to be living on it because you're getting money back every month. We don't want to get into that kind of complex example here. But in real life, the use of credit cards is way more important than we're describing here. It also provides insurance protections and all kinds of things. But purely for this example, it's a credit card in name only. It's simply a 1 month advance that is permanently there. By doing that, you have shifted your life forward by 30 days economically. You now live the life you would have been living in 30 days, except you're living it now, as long as you're buying the same things you would have bought 30 days out, except 30 days sooner. Of course, some things you can't do that with. Food, it'll go bad. But as long as you have enough things in your life, you don't have to do it all in one single purchase. It could be over a period of time. You say, oh, I really want this new video game. I really want this new component for something. I want this new camera, whatever. And it adds up to that $1,000. And then you never do that again. You simply live off the credit card without ever, there's zero interest. There's no financial penalty to this whatsoever. You've not paid for the card. You've only gotten 30 days more money. You literally are living with an extra $1,000 in your life as opposed to previous to having the card. That is good debt. You have taken on no additional risk, and if someone says, but there is additional risk, there is not. They've lied to you. There isn't any additional risk. There was a brief moment when you first got that card and before you used it that you had less risk. You then brought yourself back up to your original risk. Actually, you're still not at your original risk. You're always at somewhat better, but it's pretty close. We'll say it's the same. You go back to your original risk because you only had $1,000 in the bank to protect you when you started, which would give you 1 month of survival if you didn't change your spending. But most people can cut their spending. So let's assume, in case you lost your job or something, that you could cut your spending monthly in half and you could survive for 2 months on your savings. So you have 2 months saved up in the bank that you can live on. Great. If you were to have the situation where you needed to do the same thing, but you had the credit card, you can still cut your spending and have 2 months of savings in the bank. Yes, you have to pay off the credit card or else you're going to start incurring interest, but you have shifted everything in such a way that you're able to pay it off the same. People in that situation often see the credit card as a negative, but it is not. It is not a financial negative. It is simply not been kept back as an advantage, which it could have been. That's why they perceive it wrong. But mathematically, if you look, once you get to the end of the month, you still have $1,000 of spending power to get you through until you need to have another job and start paying those bills again. It's still, you're running tight. You still want that. You don't want to go without having enough money to live on and all that. That's not the point. The point is that it doesn't make things any riskier. But as long as you have that card, it gives you that extra month. You get to live a month better than before. So it's very, very simple to see how credit cards, when paid off with no interest, give you financial power. Not a ton, but some. Debt is powerful. Debt makes you richer. Now, in the example, we're talking about a personal one where you're buying a TV, you're buying a video game. So you're living just a little bit better, but that's not a great example. It is a great example because we want you to understand how it applies to a personal life. But it's not a great example because that's not where it's important. Where it's important is when you're a business. So now let's talk about a business. You're a business and you're doing exactly the same thing, but not instead of $1,000 a month, you're bringing in $100,000 a month. Every month you're bringing in $100,000, and now you've been given a line of credit for $100,000. And as long as you pay it off every month, you don't owe any interest on it whatsoever. Great. Now, you can take that $100,000 that's extra and invest it in your business. Maybe not all at once, maybe all at once, and use it to grow your business so you earn more money. Allows you to pay off the debt faster. But the debt has no interest because you only spent enough that you can pay it off every month. Now, you may spend more each month to pay off the net. Like there's a process to this. So you keep that debt load, but you're paying off all the new stuff as it happens, so you never are incurring interest. When you do that, that $100,000 of extra investment allows you to start a new business, allows you to grow your business, allows you to get more equipment, to sell more inventory, to sell whatever. As long as you make a good business decision out of that, as long as that $100,000 is earning anything, 1%, 2%, that's not good, but it would be something. But what if it's earning 20%, 30%, as it would be expected to? Then that, even if it's 1%, over a long period of time, will eventually pay down the debt, and you will have that $100,000 available to you again, but your buying power will be higher because you will be $100,000 larger. Eventually, that $100,000 is free. If you can pay it off at if you're earning 20 or 30% from it, you're going to pay it off in just a few months. But if you're earning at 1%, it may take years, maybe a decade. But at no point are you financially strapped. You're always just a little bit better than the month before until eventually that money was free. But it doesn't impact the rest of your business. The rest of your cash flow remains the same. So it doesn't take very much looking at math before you say, wow, it doesn't require some economic education to look and say, wow, it's really easy to see how debt makes us powerful. No wonder companies go into debt all the time. Companies that are trying to grow go into debt. They borrow money, either at no interest or very low interest, because it's easy to make a little bit of profit on that investment and pay it back. Or sometimes they take out with a lot of interest because they believe they are going to grow a lot and they really have a lot of faith in their business. And of course that starts to take on more and more risk, but that's right. The business is always risk, right? It's not like the TV where you're not trying to make money on it. This is, you're actually borrowing that money, definitely spending it, and attempting to earn against the interest, because once you're paying interest, it's a different animal. But that's why companies take out loans all the time. That's how nearly all successful companies become successful. It's how they grow. It's by leveraging debt when they have a good bet on it. It's not reckless debt. It's not bad debt. It's not overspending. It's borrowing money from someone who has it available, normally a bank, so that they can get even more from the investment than the interest accrues, so they can pay it off faster. They're actually lowers from the arbitrage. Okay, so when we talk about government debt, magically we think that all these rules of debt don't apply to the government. Of course they do, right? So if a person it's sensible for a person to have debt, and it doesn't matter how big it is, as long as it fits within the able to pay it off and never get interest. And as long as a company has the same thing, as long as it financially makes sense, it makes sense. Then for governments, what do they do? So let's look at the U.S. government, because you could have bad debt, of course. Does the U.S. government have bad debt? Well, where's the majority of the debt? We can say how big the debt is, $35 trillion or whatever. That's kind of irrelevant. And people start, well, it's so much bigger than the GDP. Does that matter? We already had a video about how the GDP is fake and means nothing. But, it's a good soundbite to make it sound scary. Again, now we know the GDP is kind of a soundbite meant to keep people not thinking about the economy or to make it sound better than it is. So if we're using that to then justify how bad the debt is, we're probably building on misdirection. That's exactly what's happening. So we have a debt of about $34 trillion. Could the U.S. just pay that off? No. Does it need to? Absolutely not. That debt is good for a really long time. The payments are pretty small. And they're able to borrow to make more payments. That's one of the tricks of debt, but we're not going to get into that. So let's talk about where the majority of that debt is. Who holds the majority of that debt? Because it's got to be a bank or something, right? And it is. The average holder of American debt, and by average, this is more than 2/3 of it. It's like 70%, I think, of the debt, about 26 trillion out of 35 trillion, right? Maybe my math's off a little bit. Pretty close to that. Is held by the American public, which the government is just an extension of the American public. So, or it's supposed to be. So this is literally America borrowed from America. That doesn't make it necessarily good, but it certainly suggests that it might not be bad. Tons and tons and tons of Americans are holding that debt. If that debt is losing money, it's losing it to Americans. And if it's making money, well, it's America making money off of other Americans. One way or another, it's the public dealing with the public. Now, it's an awful lot of people. The average American is a debt holder of that debt. And you may not realize it, but every time someone buys you a savings bond, that's that debt. That is what that represents. Of course, there are savings bonds that are not federal ones. You could have a state savings bond. That would not be the federal debt. That'd be state debt, but the same difference. But when you're talking about the standard treasury bonds that everyone talks about, the federal bonds that your grandparents give you for Christmas when you're a kid and won't mature until you're in your 20s or 30s, that's exactly what we're talking about. That is the most common holding of the federal debt. And of course, we know from other discussions we've had here, just basic logic about bonds, the thing about bonds is that the average bond does not match inflation, but does provide protection against wild inflation. So if inflation over the course of a bond goes up by 10%, the bond may only gain 8 or 9%. Technically, it's a 1 or 2% loss, but had you held that in cash, it would have been a 10% loss. So it hedges heavily against a loss of cash over time, but it doesn't actually make money in most circumstances. There are bonds that are tied to inflation. There are ones that are guaranteed to beat it, but they have different rules and so forth. But on average, they're going to lose compared to inflation. And so that means that the government, by lending that money to the American public, what it does is it takes the American public's cash holdings and essentially protects them against inflation. Not 100%, but it protects them heavily against inflation. It allows your grandparents to say, take $100 and give it to you and know that sometime long after they're gone, you'll have access to about the value of $100 that they wanted you to have. It's just them giving you that money as an adult, as a kid, and you know you'll have it. It's a guarantee in a way. It doesn't make money. It loses, but very little. So that's why they do it. And that allows Americans to have this long, very long protection against cash holdings so that one generation, often not to the next, but to a subsequent generation, is able to pass on cash that they can use at a time where they're mature enough to use it appropriately, probably when they're ready to have kids. So that's one of the reasons why bonds are good for the American public. But why is it good for the government? Well, as long as the bond is not matching inflation, the government needs to do absolutely nothing with that money. They can just hold on to the money that they borrowed and pay it back after 30 years, and they've made a small amount. If you had a 10% inflation over that time and the bond made 8%, the government would have made 2% profit on that money by doing that debt load. So if that's how it works, how much debt is too much? Well, none. There's no such thing as too much debt, because the more debt you are able to take on, the more money you make. There's no limit to it because you're able to pay it off from itself. It's guaranteed profits. So there's zero possibility in that system of there being a too big debt number. So just from that alone, the concept of saying in a blanket statement that the debt is too large, that the national debt is too large, is a nonsensical statement. It's literally impossible for a government debt that can be held this way to be too large on its own merits. You could have bad debt, and then any bad debt is bad. But the fact that the debt is large cannot be a problem. So absolutely anybody who uses the debt load is too big of the national government as a reason for any explanation. It doesn't matter what they're trying to explain. If that's the basis of it, either they don't understand economics, which is very likely, Most likely they don't understand economics and someone else has been tricking them. Or worse, they do understand economics and they think you don't and they're trying to trick you. But that is how debt works in that situation. Literally, there cannot be too much debt of the central government. They would give us as much bonds as they could when inflation is going to be higher. They just guaranteed make money. If they do absolutely nothing else, they make money. If they gave out quadzillions of debt, that alone would pay for the entire national budget just from the arbitrage after 30 years. It would take them a while to make that money, but they know it's always going to be there and they can make the payments as they go. That's really the thing that limits it, is how fast can they give out the debt, how fast can they make the payments in the interim until the debt pays for itself. Now, that's only the first segment, but it shows that it proves that there cannot be a too big number. Now, what's the next number? The next largest lender to the US government, this combined with the first takes up nearly all of it. There's definitely some extra, but this is the vast majority is these two, like 98% or something like that. It's probably not quite that high, definitely in the 90s, is intergovernment debt. And that is when one department of the government holds more money than it can use at that time, but probably can't lose. So they lend it to another government department that needs to use it right away. Now, let's give an example so you can see what I'm saying. Let's say you want to build more roads, and the federal department that builds roads, I honestly don't know what, the Department of Transportation, I assume, they need access to more money. And they know that by building roads, they will increase the national economy, thereby creating a larger tax base and making the entire system bigger and making money for the people, their investors, the American people. And so this is a good thing, and it's a good investment in making roads better. It doesn't matter if they have a budget for it or not. Making roads better makes America richer. So they want to do this. It makes sense. They need cash to do it. They could ask the American people for more money, meaning raise the taxes, but they don't need to. There's enough money in the system. So they go to another government department, let's say Social Security, who has more than enough cash to make their current payments. So they go to the Social Security department and say, we need to borrow money. Do you have any? And they say, absolutely. We'll lend it to you at this interest rate. We're not able to invest wildly with Social Security because we got to make sure it's going to be there. It's like a pension. So it's a national pension. So they need that money to be relatively stable. They know the Department of Transportation can extremely safely invest that money and make more money overall. And they know that bigger taxes, bigger economy, that pays more money into the Department of Transportation to pay back this loan. So they are very confident in lending this money over to the DOT. And the DOT will get an interest rate that's really close to inflation. The Department of Social Security likes this deal because it protects the cash it's currently holding so that it has money in the future to pay future generations with money. They don't need it right now, but they need to protect it. So this allows them to protect it by tying its protection to the growth of the American economy. If the economy shrinks, the amount that they need shrink. If the economy grows, they automatically get more. So it's a really safe bet for them because of the way they use and gain their money. The Department of Transportation gets a really good deal on that loan. So both departments are winning in this case, right? They both get the thing that they need from this transaction. So this is absolutely brilliant. What does it show up to as the American public? The federal government's going into more debt. But what they've really done is just shuffle things off of one book onto another to make the entire government run more efficiently. Maybe there's a way to make this even more efficient somewhere, but as long as we have interdepartmental accounting, we need to have things like this to allow those departments to act as individual businesses and do the best things for themselves and others together. They can't do usury or anything. That would make all kinds of accounting problems, but as long as they're acting in good interest with each other, and it's a point of trying to do the right thing but not trying to really make money off the other department, it works pretty efficiently. So this shows, again, how much of that debt would qualify as bad debt. Reasonably, there's no limit to that either. The more money that the government has sitting around in stockpiles that it can lend to other departments, the better. It's pure win in every regard. We're basically utilizing money that we've paid but didn't know what to do with, and we found a way that's going to make us more money. Again, businesses using debt to invest in more business, or in this case, simply borrowing from yourself when I could fix my car now and it'll lower the fuel efficiency or increase fuel efficiency. It's like I could save my money and pay cash for an oil change, but I'm losing gas mileage and paying more in gas now because I didn't get that oil change. But if I get that oil change sooner, my cost of gas will go down and it'll pay for itself and I don't have to earn as much money to do it. So if the government is becoming more efficient, everybody wins. At least all Americans win. Maybe foreign governments lose because Americans are winning. That's one of the secrets here. All these conversations about how bad American debt is sound like foreign governments trying to convince Americans to sabotage their own government. These are the statements you expect from hostile governments. And this is why you don't want foreign governments being allowed to, or foreigners being allowed to get involved in local politics, because they have a very strong interest in convincing you that the things that are good for you aren't. So this is what that would look like, right? Now, there's a very tiny sliver of this money left, and who holds that debt? Primarily, that is held by foreign governments. This is the only portion, this very tiny sliver of about maybe $3 trillion. So somewhere between 2 and 10%. I'm pretty confident it's a bit under 10% of the total national debt is held by foreign governments. The largest one by far is Japan. Notably, Japan also has the largest debt load by ratio of its economy of any country on earth. The United States is not the largest by quite a bit. It's in about 5th place and sits in a group very close with like Italy and Spain, places that are all very powerful economies, and we don't worry about their debt loads. We worry about the American ones. They don't tend to worry about theirs. They may be aware that they're large, but they also don't sit around talking about it all the time. Japan probably does. Theirs is massively larger than the United States. And noticeably, of countries with massive GDPs similar to those in the United States, China's debt load is much smaller, but it is also very sizable at something like $14 trillion. That is quite a bit smaller. It is significantly different on a per dollar basis of their economy, but it is not completely out of line in all sense, but they are definitely much more conservative in how they use debt. Now, when foreign governments hold this debt, the same situation arises for the most part. This depends on what those interest rate terms are, what the rate is. There's a lot of things we don't know. But as an example, if Japan holds $1 trillion of the U.S. debt, which I think is about what they hold, then this is a U.S. partner, and we want to be able to move money to them. And so we may use that debt as a means of, over time, investing in their economy. We may be getting a rate that beats inflation, so we may be making money off of them. They may be using that, exactly as the American public did, as a hedge against inflations. And when governments hold each other's money in debt, it slows down currency drift. So one of the things that people complain about in these stories, one of the things that they use this to try to say is, oh, we need to go to gold-backed currencies. Currencies are so wild and dangerous. Well, foreign debt is one of those mechanisms to slow down changes in currency. It's funny that the people who are saying gold, one of the reasons we left gold was because it had dangerous inflation risks. It didn't have the government controls of currency that we needed. All the things that people are worried about, we left gold for those reasons. And now they're pointing to the very mechanism that has protected us since gold and before gold, that the mechanism that's actually protecting the currency, now they're attacking. So the suggestion of using gold and the suggestion of getting rid of the national debt all lead to the same thing: wild, uncontrolled currency fluctuations and hyperinflation. Clearly things that foreign governments that are enemies with the United States or any country that they're saying these things to would want. They're trying to manipulate people, and it's easy to say, oh, it's so easy, debt's bad. Of course debt isn't bad. It's amazing that we live in an era where there isn't enough information that everyone doesn't just know that debt isn't automatically bad. But it's amazing how poor the American education system is, and a lot of people truly believe that debt is just bad and that lots of debt is just really bad, right? So not the case. But so while you could easily have foreign debts that are not a good rate, that are too large of a percentage of your total debt load, that put you into a compromised position, those things could happen. But in general, the foreign debt represents an extremely small percentage of the total debt load. It generally represents partners agreements between countries where they are doing so to help each other, and it promotes, it fosters international cooperation. It keeps countries from becoming aggressive towards each other. It provides a lot of important mechanisms both to our currency and to our politics, and you could consider it in many ways to be a strategic investment in America's interests at home and overseas. Now, you may not agree with the government. You may want the government to fall, which is the people asking for gold, the people who don't want any debt. they seem to be very anti-government. Not like I don't like the government, but like I'd like to actually damage America. And I understand why a lot of people have that sentiment. But if you're honestly trying to do good things for the American people, then debt is good. Lots of debt is a lot of good. And the government, in the way that it is currently borrowing money, is generally doing so in a really, really good way. Why do we have the debt ceiling problems? That's purely politics. And there's a lot of things in America that are problematic. We're not going to dig into them here, but the way that we use politics to play with our finances, it's very dangerous, very childish as a country. It's very immature on the world stage. We look ridiculous. That doesn't do anyone any favors, at least no one in America. There's no reason to have that debt ceiling. The world doesn't work that way. It's a stupid mechanism, but it keeps the American people thinking that it's bad and that it needs to be controlled. It gives a lot of power to politicians, so it tends to be used as a way to manipulate the public. It's handy when the government has the public in a state of not understanding how things work. It's easy to not trust the government and not believe that they're trying to do good things and to make money. And in many cases, they're not. There's corruption rampant through the U.S. government, but debt itself is not a part of that. Right? The debt may be used to make more money so that more money can be siphoned out of the system. Absolutely. But politicians aren't stupid. They are definitely trying to grow the economy so that they can get more. Corruption only works when there's money to get corruptly. No one's saying that politicians aren't trying to get money, but they're not, if they're smart, going to try to get it by burning the ship and sinking it and hoping some flotsam is worth something. They're going to try to steal the ship or the goods that are on it and have it as full as possible, so it's as easy as possible to steal as much as possible without anyone noticing, right? So that's how you do it, by growing the economy wildly. And lastly, the government wants stability and friendship and all these things with other countries. These are mechanisms that are very difficult to understand looking at it from a purely economic standpoint. We don't know how to calculate. What is the value of that relationship with Japan? What is the value of that relationship with the United Kingdom? Big. The value of those relationships is big. We don't know how big, but I guarantee it's larger than the small amount of money that they're carrying in debt. So the next time someone tells you that the debt load is too big, instantly the alarm should go off in your head. Whoa, they probably have no idea what they're talking about and are trying to do a soundbite to sound smart because it's something that sounds like smart people would say. Let's talk about economics in a completely watered down way that makes no sense and no one had to think about. Do we really think that the federal government doesn't know how debt works? That's pretty crazy. They've got some pretty brilliant economists up there who are making these decisions, and the politicians are just playing a game to manipulate you. It's also true that the government knows they want to grow the entire system. They're trying to make everything bigger, so that's what their goal is, right? And there's no spending limit that really causes a problem. So keep those things in mind. When you hear gold, when you hear spending limits, when you hear like all these things, stop and say, wow, either the person that's speaking to me is trying to manipulate me, or more likely, someone has manipulated someone who manipulated someone, and is eventually, they're manipulating me by proxy through all these people who just repeat simple sound bites. But it's not true. There's a lot of problems with the national spending, and one of them is they want you to not realize that they don't need to spend what they're spending. That's a very big deal. They want you to be focused on the debt and not focused on the fact that the spending is completely unnecessary. But if you look at the budgets of other countries around the world on a per capita basis, the United States does not need to spend what it does on healthcare. The United States does not need to tax as high as it does. The United States does not need to spend as much on military as it does. There are so many places that money is being filtered out, but they have to make the economy really big to hide that. If you want to look for something that could actually make the country stronger, look at all the places where money is being stolen and it's being hidden by these things. All these things are distracting you with these things, and it's really easy to overlook the fact that economic welfare is going on a massive scale. Even without direct corruption, with people directly stealing money, you have this entire industry that is creating quite literally millions of jobs in the United States that serve no actual purpose. Except maybe they do. Brilliant economists definitely look at these things and say, well, we have the choice of creating all these jobs or not creating all these jobs. We have plenty of money to pay these people whether they go to work or not. But someone is looking at the ramifications and saying, if they go to work, we have this much control. If they don't go to work, we have this much control. And what happens to society? And right now, the United States government has doubled down on putting trillions, literally trillions of dollars into the economy to hire people, normally at arm's length, who have no need to be hired whatsoever. Their job is to simply be a conduit for money from the government to flow back into the economy so it can be taxed to flow back to the government. And that has value. But not having it probably has more value, but we don't know what the social ramifications of that is. So even something that I can easily point to as feeling really, really deceptive and really, really theft related, maybe it isn't, but it probably is. And I don't recommend it. And we can dig into that on another video, but the national debt is a very, very good thing. You absolutely want an extremely large national debt, but it also requires that you're managing that debt well. Thanks for joining me. See you all tomorrow.